Hello, cruel, cruel world. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. This is a reaction video to the drama series The Reckoning about Jimmy Savile, who is played by Steve Coogan. Fans of this channel will know I already did a reaction video with my boy Sean Atwood. Shout out to Sean. And I'll be doing another one on his channel on Tuesday. But for that previous reaction video, I'd only seen one episode. Now I've seen all four. So this is kind of my final conclusions about the whole series. In this video, I'm going to first of all say what I think it did well, what it did badly. I'm going to give it a grade, and then I'm going to answer the slightly controversial question, which is, should this have been made in the first place? Okay, so let's get started. What did it do well? Well, as I said to Sean, I think Steve Coogan's acting was phenomenal because he portrayed the full character of Savile. So at times, he was kind of mostly creepy. At times when he lost his temper, he came across as intimidating and angry. But vitally, he could also be a bit cheeky, charming. And yeah, he could charm people at points when he needed to. And I think that's really important because that's how he managed to continue this prolific abuse, by hiding in plain sight, by fooling people. Another thing that I think this drama did quite well, to a degree, was that it showed some of the psychopathology, some of the psychological kind of inner works of Jimmy Savile. Not all, not enough, but some. So I'll give you some specific examples. There's one scene, I think it might have been the very first episode, where he was manipulating some of the top brass at BBC because he wanted to be the presenter for Top of the Pops. So he was very kind of cunningly dissing the other potential candidates for presenters. He was kind of complimenting them in a backhanded way and subtly insulting them under the radar so that he would be picked for the role, which is exactly what a manipulative person who, like a psychopath, would do. The other thing is that after the suicide of the 15-year-old girl, he convinced the head of the BBC that there will be young women who come and make these allegations, and it's all part of their own fantasy, and it's inevitable, and it's going to keep happening, and it's because, you know, they want to brush paths with superstars, and they have advances towards him, and he rejects them, and blah blah blah. So he sets up this scene, which is actually very kind of dark, but it's also quite manipulative and cunning in that he is preemptively excusing himself from future allegations, and that's all part of how the grooming process kind of works. The other thing that I thought was interesting in terms of his psychology that was outlined in The Reckoning was that one of the victims, one of his real life victims, I believe, said that she thought that he does a lot of his charity work to compensate for his dark deeds. And I think that's very, very possible, because one of the things that's interesting about Jimmy Savile is he did all these horrific things, obviously, but he also did do a high level of charity work. Both of those things can coexist. But more kind of psychologically than that, I think that it speaks to his cognitive dissonance. So I think that some part of him felt dirty and guilty. Obviously, it wasn't big enough for him to stop his actions, but some part of him probably felt like that. So I think he overcompensated by doing all this charity work. But I would have liked to have seen more of that. I would have liked to have seen more of Jimmy Savile's own internal psychological struggle. Another thing that I think was done very well is it kind of showed how Savile was able to hide in plain sight. So I said this to Sean Atwood on the other episode, but I think one of the most telling scenes in this whole series was in the first episode, where he abused a young girl who was sitting in a hospital bed. So right at the beginning of the scene, he goes up to these nurses on the ward and he's being very sort of flirtatious and cheeky, and he's kissing their arms and they're all laughing and giggling. And then he goes over to this girl and he does something pretty horrible to her. He gets her to put her hands in his pockets to find a juggling ball, and he's obviously abusing her. My point being is that when the girl was upset and crying, the nurse who Jimmy had flirted with before was kind of saying to her, it's just Jimmy being Jimmy, he didn't mean it like that, you've misunderstood the situation. And you can understand from her perspective why she might think that, because she only got a little taste of the flirtatious version of him. So I think that's one of the reasons that he was able to do what he did for such a long period of time, why it was so kind of ongoing and chronic, was exactly that. He was able to hide in plain sight. And that scene and the whole drama showed that very well. Finally, I think another thing they did is the general misogyny around this time was shown quite well to a degree. I think they could have done it a bit more. So, for example, there were some conversations between him and this mayor who also bizarrely gives ice creams out that was very kind of sexist. But what I thought they could have done more in the drama is they could have involved the higher ups. So it would have been interesting to see somebody near the top of the BBC or in the TV world or in the police make some of these misogynistic comments. And finally, another kind of psychological aspect is the brashness of Jimmy Savile when he's lying. So at least once, maybe twice, when he's speaking to the reporter says, "You said blah, blah, blah," and Jimmy Savile said, "No, I didn't say that." So again, it seemed very sort of sharp and aggressive the way he answered some of these questions, which again, I think reflects his true character. Okay, so moving on, that's what I thought this drama did well. What did it do badly? I'm afraid this list is a bit longer. So I've already hinted on the first one, and that's the culpability of other people. So for example, it seemed very convenient to me that when the BBC were talking about whether they should hire him as a presenter in the future for bigger shows, they kind of said, "Oh, well, our lawyers have investigated what happened with the suicide attempt, and he wasn't found to be responsible, Savile, so, you know, let's just let that go." There was no kind of responsibility, I think. There was passing the buck. There was no details of that investigation. And a question that I actually got asked in Sean Atwood's podcast, which I think is a very interesting question, is have the BBC taken enough kind of responsibility? Have they just been passing the buck? And I couldn't answer it at that point because I'd only seen one episode. Now that I've seen all 4 episodes, I don't think they did. So the BBC boss said it was just rumours, it just been investigated. Whereas I think in reality, the truth is a lot darker. I think from what I know, that people did know exactly what Jimmy Savile was doing, but they intentionally turned a blind eye because he was their cash cow, he was the golden egg. And they kind of sidestepped that in the drama, I think, by suggesting that they just went off other people's information. So to summarise what I'm trying to say and what I'm rambling a little bit, is the drama suggested that they didn't know and they were given false information because of investigations, and therefore they gave him the benefit of the doubt, whereas I think in reality they did know, which is far more kind of evil. Okay, another weakness, I'm going to watch my words carefully here because I don't want to come across as callous, but I thought the depictions of abuse were a bit repetitive. Maybe not repetitive, but formulaic. That's the word I'm looking for. And I get that Jimmy Savile's abuse was absolutely prolific. You know, there were literally hundreds of victims. But my point being is that it felt like it followed a template. For example, there could have been more about how this abuse affected the individuals in later life. Not just that one of them committed suicide, and not just when they were adults, they were tearful when they saw him on TV. I mean, just to be absolutely clear, I'm sure those things did happen. I'm not saying they didn't happen, but there are so many more detailed, in-depth, interesting elements of the effect on the victim's psyche. So I would have liked to have seen some scenes when they were reporting it to friends and family, when they're reporting it to the police and they weren't believed, or when they were really ashamed. I want to see them suffering through the emotional turmoil, the shame, the guilt that's associated with being a victim of this kind of abuse. I want to see the more kind of less clear-cut types of psychiatric sequelae. I want to see how it affected their own sexual boundaries when they were older. I want to see self-harming, drug and alcohol use. Not just because it's more interesting from a psychiatric perspective, which it is, but I think it would make the victims more human if they did that. Whereas what I think they did, I think they attempted to show the victim's perspective, but it was all so similar that it kind of got a bit diluted, I think, from my opinion. I know that's a bit of a controversial thing to say, so I'd be interested to know what you think, my Schmike for Schmall guys. Let me know in the Schmall section below. Another criticism I have is that I felt that The Reckoning added unwarranted and incorrect tension and drama towards the end. So the reporter that was with Jimmy Savile kind of was suggesting that he was about to expose Jimmy Savile, and it kind of felt like there was a race between what would happen first, whether he'd be exposed or whether he would die because he got ill. Whereas in actual fact, that didn't happen in real life. And I think that needs to be put across in the drama, because that's what makes this case so horrific, so grotesque, is the fact that the victims never got justice. Jimmy Savile was never caught. So creating this false kind of narrative, this false potential drama at the end, I think, I can understand why they did that, but I think it's a bit inaccurate, basically. Okay, this is a little bit of a contentious issue, but I'm in two minds genuinely about how the victims were portrayed in this. So the actual real life victims, I said on Sean Atwood's podcast that I thought it was a bit odd to just have random pictures of them at the end of the episode. It felt a bit forced. It felt kind of added on. It's not that I disagree with the sentiment, you know, that it should be about the victims. 100% I agree with that. It's just that it felt like they made the program, then they thought, we're focusing on Jimmy too much. What can we do? Let's just put some pictures up at the end. That's what it felt like to me. I'm not saying that's what happened, but that's what it felt like. Having said all that, I changed my stance a little bit now that I've seen more of the episodes, because it actually had the victims talking and telling a bit more of their story, so they got to explain. But a criticism I have is that there wasn't really enough about them and how it affected them personally. They just kind of basically said, this is how he got away with it. But we already know, everybody knows how Jimmy Savile got away with it. That's, you know, it's not exposing anything new. And kind of connected to that, I felt a bit unsure, iffy, uncertain, cringy maybe about the script at the beginning of the drama. So the drama at the beginning, there was the words on white that said, you know, this is a drama to explain how he hid in plain sight. I mean, that's literally the very definition of show, not tell, right? Why are you saying that? Surely you could just show it in your drama. So that's the equivalent of, I know, the beginning of Tropic Thunder saying this is a comedy program and it's meant to make you laugh. If you're doing it well, then people will laugh. So in the same way, if the drama is showing how Jimmy Savile got away with it, then you should make the drama good enough to not have to write it in words at the beginning. I think I can kind of understand why they're doing it. I think because they preemptively assume that there will be criticisms of voyeurism, which they were, they're trying to cover their own back, but I just thought it was a bit sloppy. Okay, so I told you about what I think were the strengths. I told you what I thought the weaknesses. Overall, my grade is a C+. Okay, moving on. This generally had lukewarm receptions by critics. A lot of people said, what's the point of making this drama? What did it add to the whole kind of story? And it mostly got 2 and 3 stars altogether. And one of the questions was this voyeurism? So I'm going to answer all of those questions. What's the point? What did it add? But I'm going to put a twist on that question by asking this. Is it possible to make a Jimmy Savile drama which the critics would have liked? So is there a version of this which exists in the ether that I would have given an A grade rather than C+? And I would actually argue that it's almost impossible, that it's kind of setting up a project to fail. And these are the specific reasons. This one project in general, not other kind of similar projects. And I think that these are the reasons, right? First of all, you can't root for the central character. And I would say that it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to make a drama that's engaging where you're not rooting for the central character. Actually, I'll rephrase that. I think it's possible to do it if you're not rooting for the central character, as long as there are other main characters that you're rooting for. So you can have like an evil protagonist, can't you? Like, was it There Will Be Blood or, No Country for Old Men, for example. But that works because you're rooting for other people, whereas in the Jimmy Savile drama, The Reckoning, you weren't really rooting for anybody else. At stretch, you can maybe say you're rooting for the reporter, but I didn't think he was that interesting a character, number one. And also, you know the outcome. You know that he doesn't win. He doesn't get to expose Jimmy Savile. So that's one of the reasons I think this is almost impossible. Another reason is that you can't show Savile's own kind of struggles in TV land. You can't show him struggling to be recognised for his rewards because you can't make the audience want to sympathise for him. For the same reason, you can't really focus too much on his charity work because it doesn't work when he's this horrific man that's done all these grotesque, horrible, life-damaging things. That you can't sympathise with him, so you can't show his struggles. And also connected to that, even though I said before I want to see some of his internal struggles and turmoil, which I do, you can't do it too much because you don't want the audience to try. You don't want the drama to be about trying to understand him too much because what he did is unforgivable and ununderstandable. And finally, I think in this particular case, in this particular project, you can't really build up that much tension. So as I said before, there was this, will he get caught, will he won't get caught? It was false, it was forced, because everybody knows the truth. Everybody knows the outcome of this show. So that makes it really difficult to make it interesting. You can't really have any plots or twists. Okay, so another kind of follow-up question for that is, what ways could this have been changed potentially to make it an A project, to make it successful? So I'm sort of doing this as a layperson because I'm not a screenwriter, I'm not an author. Oh wait, hang on, I am an author. I have my own, sorry, I shouldn't talk about that now. I think there's only 2 possible ways that I can think of where this could have been successful. A Psych for Sore guys, if you can think of something beyond my suggestions, please let me know in the show action. Number 1 is to make it more from a victim's perspective. So as I said before, I thought it was very one-dimensional, all of the victims. So I'll give you an example. It had this young girl that committed suicide because she was R-worded by Jimmy Savile. What about if the show was more about the wider effects that it had on her social circle, on her school friends, on her family? And I suppose the counter-argument of that is that Savile had so many victims, literally hundreds, that you couldn't put them all in the drama. But maybe the counter-argument of that is that's the point. If you show just how one person's life has been irreparably damaged and the life around them, say this young girl, then you can make the point that, you know, this whole drama, this intense emotional discharge happened to one person. Can you imagine what it's like when there's hundreds of people? Or the other alternative way that I think it could have worked better is, again, I said this before, if you put more blame on the people in power who turned a blind eye. So just to be crystal clear, I am saying that the abuse that occurred was Jimmy Savile's fault, right? But the reason it continued and was maintained was the fault of other people in power. But we already know what he did. So I think the drama would have revealed more, would have been more interesting to focus on those other people. Because, yeah, it's like, you know, that film Air about Michael Jordan's sneaker deal. He was barely in it. He was literally in the background. I think you could have made a version where Jimmy Savile was only in the background, then you couldn't accuse it of being voyeuristic. And it's more around the people around him who allowed it to happen. And to have those conversations to, you know, that were uncomfortable between the head of the BBC, between like the police. Those things would have actually, I think, been a bit more satisfying to the victim rather than just saying what's already been said in documentaries. And in fact, in The Reckoning, the main characters and the decision makers, as I've touched on before, just seemed naive. They trusted the investigations of others that happened off screen. So I'll give you another specific example. There was a young woman who called the police to complain after she saw Savile on TV, and the police ignored her, but that happened off screen. So why not bring that as to the focus, or at least some of the focus of the drama? So I guess what I'm saying is that it felt like it took the easy option out, and specifically with the BBC, that would have been a very brave step to have taken if they themselves took more culpability by showing awkward conversations that were had by the heads of the BBCs, not just, oh well, it's only, what was the phrase? Yeah, it's only rumours, there's no evidence. I think that phrase was used like 20 times in the drama. Anyway, I'm rambling on a little bit. I hope you enjoyed my critique of this programme. Let me know what you think, bits that you agree with and disagree with in this comment section below. I did hint before that I am an author, and I am by Into Minds, my book. I assess some real life people, not quite as prolific or as horrific as Jimmy Savile, but there's a few that will certainly remind you of some of the things that he did that I've seen in real life, my own psychoanalysis of those individuals. Go and cop it. Until next time, have a blessed day, and remember, I love you.